Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. My guest this week is someone whose name is synonymous with leadership, discipline, integrity, and character. I am truly honored to be joined by retired four-star General Stanley McChrystal, former commander of U.S. and international forces in Afghanistan, former leader of Joint Special Operations Command, co-founder of the McChrystal Group, and New York Times bestselling author. His newest book on character is more than a title, it's a movement. In it, he challenges us to rethink what leadership really means, not as something tied to rank or resume, but to who we choose to be when no one is watching. You may have seen him on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, CNN, Face the Nation, CNBC, PBS, and more, offering powerful insights into trust, responsibility, and the human side of leadership at the highest level. What made this conversation especially meaningful is how incredibly grounded he is. I had the rare privilege of referring to him as Stan throughout our conversation, a small thing that says so much about the humility and authenticity he brings to everything that he does. A heartfelt thank you to General Stanley McChrystal, or rather Stan, for sharing his time and wisdom with me on the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. Be prepared to be inspired. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. I'm your host, Jody Grunwald. And as I say in every single episode, I interview the changemakers, the inspirers, and those who are disrupting the status quo in the best way possible. And today, I could not be more honored than to have General Stanley McChrystal here with me. Hi, General. How are you?
Well, call me Stan, please, Jody, and thanks for having me.
Well, Stan, I feel honored to call you that. So thank you so much for coming on and being a part of this. I just want to share a little bit. I mean, you've been on tour doing so many interviews. Everybody has to know who you are, but I'm just going to share it here because I'm honored to have you on. You are the co-founder of McChrystal Group, the former commander of U.S. and international forces in Afghanistan, former leader of the Joint Special Operations Command. And if that wasn't enough, right, you've now authored several books, author of My Share of the Task, a memoir, Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World, Leaders, Myth and Reality, Risk, a User's Guide, and your new book, which is right behind me over here, on character choices that define a life. Just so incredible. I'm in the midst of writing first book with several authors, so it's lots to learn on this side, but how does it feel to hear all of that every single time someone introduces you?
Yeah, the first thing is it's kind of out of body because I know I'm just me. And so it sounds better when it's about somebody else. And when I hear it about me, I go, yeah, but I didn't do that good a job in that or whatever. But it's nice because I'm at this point in my life where I can look back at the things that I've done or not done and start to get an appreciation for what was most important. What do I really feel best about? What are the things that I might be proud of? And what are the things I wish had gone differently?
Yes. And you know what the thing about it is too, is a lot of people, they don't ask themselves that question. We spend a lot of time, I feel like, in our lives going through what I call cruise control, right? And and so we don't always ask ourselves those questions until the end of a time at a job, or after a child is born, or after a grandchild is born. So it's, how do you feel like we get off the hamster wheel of cruise control?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I'll take your comments and give kind of a lengthy answer. The military had a series of assignments. So you'd go to a unit typically for 3 or 4 years, then you'd rotate. And often when you're in the unit, you would be complaining about this. We're working too hard, we're doing it differently. There's something you weren't happy about. And then you got to the day you were leaving, and the military would have these rituals called a hail and farewell. It's a social event. Many organizations do them. Typically get the wives and husbands together, and you have this farewell for people who are leaving, and somebody stands up and says nice things about you, and then you make comments leaving, and often you go, wow, I really liked it here. I really like these people. And I started to remind myself early in my career that, it's important to like it during it, not just in a rearview mirror. and approach it. And so it started to become a goal to appreciate what you got when you got it, because sometimes it's really good. And I was in some assignments where it was magically good. I enjoyed the people, I enjoyed the job, I enjoyed my role. And I was lucky enough to realize that in the moment. And now I'm at this point in life where I'm 70 now, about to be 71. I've had a military career I'm proud of, but I'm happy to be doing something different. I've started a business 15 years ago, which is a real source of pride. Got people I love working with. I've got a wonderful marriage of 48 years. My son, and we've only got one son, my son and daughter-in-law live next door to us, and our 3 granddaughters live 20 feet from us. So my life is about as good as anybody could have it. And so I'm lucky that I recognize that. I'm lucky that I just feel fortunate.
I want to go back in time with you a little bit. And I was lucky enough to hear a lot of your story when you were at the Ocean First Bank event here locally in Manahawkin, New Jersey. And it was listening to you, I was hanging on every word, just listening to your story. You're so genuine and authentic. And that's just so, defines character, right? That's truly a great way to characterize someone as being authentic. But before we get into the book and character, was becoming a general always in, foresight for you?
No, it wasn't. My father was a soldier, and he ended up as a major general, and his father was a soldier, retired as a colonel. And so I always wanted to be my dad. And I never associated that with rank. From when I was very young, he was a combat infantryman in Korea and Vietnam. He was my role model and my hero, really till the day he died at age 89. And so I wanted to be him. That never connected with rank. That connected with the idea of being a good soldier. And most of my peers, I went to West Point when I was 17, and I didn't know anybody in my class or that I knew at West Point who was thinking about being a general. Even though there were statues and paintings and buildings named after former generals, Lee and Grant and Patton and all these people, we all were thinking about being good lieutenants and being good captains, because that was about as far as our vision would let us imagine. And so being a general was never a goal. And then you get in your career at a certain point in your life, in a military career, and I was an officer for 34 years. There's a certain point, well, several inflection points. There's one where you realize, I can do this job. You come in and you've been there 2 or 3 years, you're really worried about it initially, and then you go, I can do this. If I work hard, I can be as good as my contemporaries. Then there's another period in your career, and I'm going to call it, in my case, 10 or 12 years in, when I suddenly said, I can be good at this and I can be successful in the Army system. And my goal then was to command a battalion, and that was 600 people. If I could command a battalion, that was the ultimate goal, because it's really probably the best job in the Army. And you're still young enough to be close enough to the soldiers. The organization of 600 soldiers is small enough, you pretty much can know everybody's name. After that, as you get more senior, it's harder to do that. So it isn't until you're pretty far into your career when you suddenly look around and you go, not only do I enjoy this, but I actually think I could be senior in this organization. I think, I look at the generals I see, they're human beings. I think I could probably do that. And it's not at that point, I don't think most of us thought about, well, we want to be a general because being a general brings, esteem or any of that kind of thing. You want to say, like most of us in organizations, I could run this place and I could run it better than the people running it right now. Now, you're probably kidding yourself, but at a certain point in your career, when you think you've got all the answers, you say, well, let me get at it. Let me give it a shot.
Yeah. I have a mantra and I have a program about when your why is greater than your how. Right. And so when your why is greater than your how, so many things are possible. But fear takes hold in many cases. And so the how becomes so big that the why kind of gets lost, the sight of the why gets lost. But when you're saying to yourself, this is what I want to do, you're putting your life on the line every single day. How did you push fear aside? For those who are listening, the listeners who are listening, they may not be going to battle, but they're going to the battle of life every single day. And so there's things they want to do that they may be putting off out of fear. You put your life on the line every day. Tell us how you did that and kept going forward.
Yeah, let me first say that I think it is extraordinarily similar in the civilian world, commercial world, and in the military. We say, well, you're putting your life on your line. That's true, but everybody understands that up front. That's it's like being a policeman or a fireman or something else that involves potential for physical danger. You've sort of sorted out that reality long before. And so you do what you do because that's what needs to be done. Actually, the harder decisions around fear are making the right decisions when it's dangerous for your career or your reputation, or you're going to let people down. It's the things that everybody runs into in life. And we sometimes get very cautious, overly cautious. We're so worried that we're going to lose what we have or what we are, that we're not willing to make the decision that in our hearts we sort of know is the right decision. We've got to push, we've got to make an effort to do this. And that caution can make us much less effective as leaders because it's viral through your organization. If you are afraid to try new things, if you're afraid to go in new directions and put things at risk, the entire organization will start to adopt that attitude unconsciously. And so the leader has got to be prepared to make decisions that they truly think are best, even though it may be detrimental to their career. You think of the CEO who's more worried about losing their job than they are about giving the organization a chance to grow and evolve as it could. And you see that, in all walks. So I would say that I tell people, you've got to command like it's your last command. Don't command like you want the next level up. Make the decisions like you are never going to be promoted or not going to go anywhere else. Because if you're thinking about, well, I got to posture myself for that next one, you're often going to be self-centered and unlikely to make the tough decisions.
If you could sit down with the 25-year-old version of yourself, not to give advice, to ask him a question, what would you ask him?
What were you thinking about? I've never heard the question asked that way, because when I look back at the things I did, and I did some things really well, there were moments in my career when I look back and I go, wow, I got it exactly right. And then there are other moments when I got it exactly wrong. And if I go back and try to put myself in the position, you wonder whether you let emotion or you let bullheadedness. A quick story, I was a captain and I came home from Korea after a year in Korea. And because just of the way that the assignment process worked at the installation where I was assigned, I was slated into this terrible staff job. I wanted to go down into a battalion and I wanted to command a company, and they set me up to this high-level staff job that was just purgatory. And it wasn't because it was me, it was because I was the next guy that arrived on post and they needed a captain and they slotted me to that job. And so I was outraged. I'd just come back from a year deployed on the DMZ in Korea, and I thought I deserved a better deal. And yet I was told to report to this lieutenant colonel for sort of my in-briefing to that job. Now, the lieutenant colonel had already heard that I didn't want to be assigned there, and he didn't have to be told because no captain wanted to be assigned to the job that I was going into. But I realized that the job the lieutenant colonel was in was one he didn't want to be in either. It wasn't what he wanted. So he is doing that. Now he's about to deal with this disgruntled captain who's going to walk in and tell him how unhappy he is to be in this place. And I thought about it, and I was lucky enough to run into a sergeant major friend of mine who I'd served with before I went into my interview, and I was prepared to go in with righteous indignation and say, I shouldn't be here, I'm better than this, I shouldn't, And instead, I went into the lieutenant colonel who was sort of, you could tell he was almost tensed up, expecting this young captain to give him this negative response. And I said, sir, obviously I want to get down to a company. I want to command a rifle company, but I'm happy to work for you. And here's my promise. For as long as I work for you, I'm going to give you 100%. I'm going to be completely loyal, completely focused. And you're not going to know that this isn't exactly where I want to be. And what I'm going to ask from you is leadership. Teach me while I'm here. And when it's my time to go, I hope that you'll support that. And you could just see the tension go out of the guy. Now, there weren't many times in my career I got it right like that, but I stayed 7 months working for that officer and had the best relationship, learned more from him, and he looked out for me. And it was just one of those times where I step back and go, maybe the 40-year-old Stan McChrystal was in the 25-year-old body that particular day. But I think back on those as leadership lessons that I tried to remind myself later.
I think that's such an important lesson, because a lot of times we think, we look at where we are and we're like, no, we should be in a better spot. We've worked hard. We already have a little experience. But you kind of dismantled the feeling of, it sounded like, the angst about and the ego, right? I really do believe when we let our egos go and we have that authentic conversation, it diffuses that consistent feeling of tension. And we, a lot of times, connection is my entire platform of the work I do. And so, as yours is character now, mine is connection. And I feel like between character and connecting with ourselves and connecting with those in front of us, it brings us to a much better outcome. So that's really important. Everybody knows that you had a pivotal moment in your life that changed your direction. And unfortunate Rolling Stone magazine article that changed some things for you. And I'd love to share with the audience, for those who may not know, a little bit about that. And the reason I want to say also to this, that I bring this up, is that there are curveballs that come to us when we least expect them. And we'll get more into that, but I'll let you answer that question first.
Yeah, Jody, thanks for asking. And most of us are going to have some kind of pivotal moment or moments in our life. And if we're lucky, then we pivot as well as possible out of that. The story for me, and people almost don't remember it now, although it's still pretty important to me. I was commanding all forces in Afghanistan, coalition forces and Afghan forces. And I was a 4-star general. I'd been in the Army 34 years. And a story came out in Rolling Stone magazine, written by a freelance reporter who was doing a single story for them. And it was a negative story. And I didn't think it was particularly accurate or fair, but it didn't matter. I'm responsible because a story like that comes out and it goes on the desk of my boss, the President of the United States, and it's an unfair position to put him in. And so it was one of those things that happens. And so I flew back to the United States and offered my resignation to President Obama, and he was gracious and he accepted it. And in an instant, and I was in the Oval Office with him, in an instant, everything about the trajectory of my life from really the day I was born in an Army hospital, lived as an Army child before I went to West Point at age 17, and then I've been a soldier ever since. All that changed because I wasn't a commander anymore. I wasn't a 4-star general anymore. I wasn't even a soldier anymore. My very identity is now at least in question. So I leave the Oval Office, and you've got that almost unreal feeling, out of body experience, because it's happening, but you have a hard time believing that it's happening to you, because I'd always thought there was a chance I'd be killed or relieved for incompetence or something. That's fine. But I thought I'd never be, basically accused of this kind of thing. But I had been, and this was the outcome. So I drove across, I'd flown back from Afghanistan all night, and I drove across the city to where my wife was living in military quarters at Fort McNair. And I go in the house, and she'd been with me at that point for 33 years of marriage. And I told her, Annie, it's over. The president accepted my resignation. And she looked at me and she said, good, which was a shock. And then she goes, we've always been happy and we'll always be happy. And in an instant, I don't think she'd planned to say that. I don't think she knew the president was going to accept it. I think that was her intuitive decision in the moment that says, we've got to face forward. We're not going to face back. We're not going to hand wring over what happened in the past. We're not going to try to relitigate it. We're not going to be defeated by this or defined by this. We are going to move forward. Now, she wouldn't have put all those words to it, but in retrospect, that's what it did. And I joke with people that my wife, Annie, lives life like she drives with no use for the rearview mirror. And so what it did was it liberated me, because if you think about it, I could have been a bitter old general, and that's actually a vocation you can adopt if you want to be one for the rest of your life. And she said no. And she also said she wasn't going to whisper in my ear and say, you got screwed, this is unfair. She just wouldn't have any of that. We were going to have a good life going forward. And she's lived up to that. That's just her style. And it's reinforced it in me. And so what I tell people is, when you get those inflection points in life, usually they're apparent. They're not always apparent. They might be a divorce. They might be a death. They might be a job change. You got some options. And the decision is yours. You have control. You have agency. And if you want to dog paddle in circles and keep relitigating things or living in history, I think that's a missed opportunity. And so probably the most fortunate decision of my life came from that moment, from that woman.
I definitely want to get into Annie and talk about her, because you speak throughout the book about her, and she sounds like an incredible and wonderful human being. And I wish we could have had her on with you. That would have been great to see the two of you in action together. But when I think about it, and I've been in my own way in situations where the title is no longer there, right? And when that is, why do you think in society we allow titles to define us?
Because I think we define people by titles, and that's a very interesting point. Sometimes it is reinforcement of our success or our skill to have a title, either an elected position or a rank in the military, or even a level of celebrity. A person becomes a celebrity with a certain level of esteem that people place. And whenever that's threatened or taken away, we think that the thing that defined us has just been pulled away. And if we let it define us, then that will be the case. As I wrote in the book, the soldier is in the uniform, not on the uniform. Rank is pinned on the uniform, medals and all those things are on the uniform. And once you take the uniform off, the person is still inside. The soldier is still there. That individual is still there, but we forget that. We think that if we suddenly are open to criticism or we've had some kind of failure, that we're not us anymore. Well, we are us. We're probably us, just maybe revealed a little more, and maybe the scar tissue taught us something. And so I think we've got to be prepared to understand that most of those things are a little false anyway. We make somebody a CEO and we suddenly proclaim them, they're a superstar. Well, they're the same person they were the day before we made them a CEO. So I think we need to understand that often the position that we put people in and the person are two separate entities. That's why you can't let your ego get built up into it. In the military, when you become, a general, and particularly if you become 3 or 4-star general, there's an awful lot of respect given to you and all this kind of thing when you move around. But it's just you. It was good old Stan McChrystal. Same guy who was Lieutenant McChrystal, everybody thought was a knucklehead. Now they're saying he's so smart, just he's got rank. And I didn't get any smarter. I just got older.
I noticed in my own life that it seems as if with the title, if people can get things from you, right, then you're sought after. Yeah. And they once that title is stripped away and you're no longer valuable to them moving forward in their life in some way, then that hurts us. Do you believe that hurts us in our character or in our ego or both?
Yeah, I don't think it affects our character really. Maybe if we let it, I think it hurts our ego a lot. It's also an eye opener because when you are not powerful or you are not in a position like that, who still wants to be with you? Who still wants to hang out with you? One of the things that was most instructive to me after I left the service was, uh, I thought I was badly damaged goods. I thought I was disgraced and all these things because there'd been a lot in the news for a limited period of time because that's the news cycle in our country. But for me, the wound stayed there for much longer. But friends of mine were incredibly loyal. They still came around. The ones who were true friends weren't friends because of the job I was in. They were friends because of who I was and the shared experiences we've had. And I found out I had a lot more of those than I realized. And then you found out some people weren't that way. And, it's instructive, but it also is most instructive. What kind of friend do I want to be to people? Because invariably our friends go through the similar thing. And what are you to them when they go through that moment?
I love that because, I bet you if I look back, there could have been moments that I failed in that way, and I think it's important that we do that introspection, and make sure that it's never that we're connecting always just for how to get ahead. What about we're humans on this, spinning globe here trying to just live a great life, and connection to everything is key. I watched your interview on Jon Stewart. I thought it was funny, and I don't have any beer for you. I apologize through the Zoom screen for sure, but it was a great interview. But you said a quote that I wrote down because I was afraid I wasn't going to remember it, from Thomas Paine, that I never heard before. Reputation is what man thinks of us, and character is what angels know of us. I loved that quote. Can you expand a little bit more on that thought?
Yeah, I sure can. We spend an awful lot of time worried about what our reputation is. And sometimes that's branding, that's things that are external. And in today's world, there's an awful lot of effort to make a brand that may not be congruent with what we really are. It makes us seem more clever, more whatever it is we want to be. And we like that. We sort of cloak ourselves into that, at least most of us do. We also know what we're like when we step away from that. We know what we're like when uh, nobody's going to know what we've done, the decisions we've made. People say character is reflected by what you do when you're alone in the dark. Uh, but I think it's important for us to remember that angels know us and we know us. We're going to have to live with us. We're going to have to, if there's too big a gap between the person we claim to be and the person we really are, we'll know that. And that, what I call a say-do gap, brings an awful lot of, I don't know, tension inside you. And that's why I think that the closer we can get to being who we really are, and hopefully what that means is who we really are gets elevated a bit, because it creates a pressure. I really want to be a respected person, so I better act like someone who is worthy of respect.
Right. And I think we do a lot of generalizing in life across the board, right? So we characterize certain people. And you mentioned this in your talk at Ocean First, which I thought was it was wonderful to hear you say it, because I truly believe in this, is that we were talking about sitting in rooms doing, having these conversations with some of these leaders whose beliefs were so uniquely different than the beliefs on this side of the world. And you talked about how, and for a minute, I had that moment of saying, that makes sense. That I didn't think of it that way before. To them and to their culture and to where they live, they believe they're 100% right, as we do and did. So explain a little bit more about your thought process about that. And I know you mentioned it on a recent talk show as well, that we have to understand we all have opinions, and we're all sitting in places where we think that we are better or we know better. But that's not always true.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I use the term empathy for that because, empathy is not sympathy. It's not agreeing or feeling sorry for somebody. It is, in my definition, it's the ability to see things through their perspective. And if you think about it, the way I described it of people like Afghan leaders, they're sitting on the other side of the table with me. They've got a different religion, different culture, different history. Their entire life journey has been different than mine. And so if I sit on the other side of the table and say, these people just don't get it, they've got to be thinking, this guy just doesn't get it. And if we'd had their life journey, there's 100% chance that we would see life in the same way that they do, because most people are rational and they reflect the experiences they've had and the incentive structures and all around them. And so you find this in war particularly because you want to say there's good guys and bad guys. There's our side and then there's the bad side, the evil guys. And you want to dehumanize the enemy by giving them names like the Huns or the Japs, etc. And in reality, that's an attempt to dehumanize them so that it's easier to fight and potentially kill them. And you don't step back and say, well, they may have a point. They may have a view that at least warrants being listened to. Well, this applies around the world today in geopolitics. If you don't stop and listen to the other side and realize, wow, I think that too, then you can't ever get past the idea, all I've got to do is bomb them enough till they see it my way. And that usually doesn't happen. But then inside our country too, we've got vastly different experiences. If you take a white male living in the Rust Belt of America, and we'll call him age 40, their life experience now is very different from someone of a different age, sex, background, living somewhere else in the country. And so their view of the economy, their view of politics, their view of whatever, and that's going to be true of any two comparisons we make. And almost invariably, you'll find that the people there have reached rational opinions because of the information they get, because of the experience they have, because of what's good for them. And this is where all the screaming and fighting in society is so pointless, because it doesn't work. It doesn't make it any better. Just because you criticize the other side doesn't make them listen more or agree with you more. And maybe you'll find that they are at least part right.
So I don't want to make this anywhere a political conversation, but I know people are going to be wondering, what is your take on all, in a short version here of some of the things that are going on in the world today? Are people really listening to each other? It doesn't seem that way. It seems like as much as it's, internally, there's a lot of, you're right, you're wrong. What you believe is wrong. I'm not here. People are not listening to each other, and I feel like I'm 53, and so I feel like this is the first time I'm seeing the world internally here, when we're not accepting or listening to each other. There's fights on social media. Families aren't talking. So can you share a little bit, and also if you have any suggestions of how for us to listen to each other better?
Yeah. Around the world, we're seeing sort of politics as historically normative. It's not anything new. Countries are trying to conquer other countries. Autocratic leaders are trying to get control. That's as old as history as itself, and it's rough. And we've just got to be realistic about it, and we got to navigate that world as it is. Enemies have always painted the opponents as negative. What we're seeing inside the United States is different from anything in my lifetime. Now, if we go back to the run-up to the Civil War, there were a number of decades before the Civil War where slavery was a huge issue from the signing of the Constitution on. And it was an economic issue. It was a political issue, who would have representation in Congress. It was a social issue. But about 1850, it started to change. About 1850, it started to become a cultural divide where people from the South didn't like people from the North just because they were from the North. And the same was true north to south. And Uncle Tom's Cabin came out in 1851, and that also sort of dialed that in. So for the last decade before the start of the Civil War in 1861, you could argue that the Civil War was inevitable because we had gone on this, we'd stopped listening, we were screaming at each other politically, and you had people who were benefiting from that. You had some leaders who were leveraging that for political gain and some others for economic gain. Where we see now is not that, but it's got some similarities. We have some cultural differences in society where we have painted people who have a different view from us as being wrong, not just incorrect, but morally wrong. And we've got this idea that we are being opposed by people who want to take from us. They want to take whatever it is we've got. And internal to the US, whenever people or groups start to feel threatened, they sort of pull in together, they band together, they potentially defend, and they can become very aggressive. And they stop listening because you don't have the opportunities to have open discussion. That's frightening. And the causes in our country right now are made worse because information technology has made it so easy to propagate these messages, and it's so frighteningly effective. Then there are a number of opportunistic leaders who are benefiting from this. They are leveraging it, and I'll throw the net wide. To a degree, the media benefits financially when there's more, controversial stories and disagreements. There are individuals who politically are doing the same on both sides. And then there are just forces in our society that make this easier to have happen. And all of those things are things that I think we don't understand just how dangerous they are. I think because this could go out of control. We say we could never have another civil war because we're more civilized now. Well, of course we could. But we can also not have one. All we got to do too is decide not to do that. But I think we need to understand that the pieces are in place for us to have more division, not less. And so part of my call for a conversation on character is that's something that everybody can discuss. And we won't all agree exactly what good character is, but a lot of it will be the same. I think we'll all believe that integrity and loyalty and respect for others, that's not really political. That's sort of things that should be reflected in a human's character and in a nation's character.
And you're leading me right into where I wanted to go, which is, you wrote this book. I think you credit your wife for helping you decide to write the book on character. And I really want to know why in a moment, but I also want to share, it's interesting how we're finding out people's character more so than I think we'd ever thought. I wonder if people really understand, and I'm so glad you started this conversation. You're deep into it. You're going all over to speak about it because maybe it might be the one thing that could help us to be open to and get us back together as a community, right? Because we may be a country, but we are a community. We're not listening, we're not connecting. And so tell us a little bit about, why you wrote the book, and kudos to Annie for pushing you to do it.
Yeah, I think she was trying to shut me up. I was, bothering her. But yeah, no, this is what's so, I think, important about the idea of having the conversation on character. And I'll start with the fact that I think that we should be emphasizing character and selecting our leaders on character. We pay attention to policy discussions or politics or things like that. But in reality, I don't think that's the primary criteria that a person should be elected for. I think we should be electing for character, and then they will go into a very responsible position, taking our country in the direction that it will go. And they will use that character as the lens at which they look at things. Now, there will be different political opinions and policy views as well, and that's fine. But if it all emanates from a firm character, a good, solid character, I think we're on solid ground. And I think you can work together and go forward. If they are not, then I think you're not moored to anything. I think someone without character can propose the best policies in the world, or let's put it this way, the most popular policies in the world, and they can get themselves elected and in a position, and then suddenly, as the world will, it will push and pull. That person is not tethered to something that really we can count on. Instead, they'll move with it, and sometimes they'll move very rapidly with it. And that is where I think we are most dangerous. I throw out the idea occasionally of, if we had a presidential debate, and right now a presidential debate, what they do is they get together and prepare policy positions, but then they try to prepare one-liners so that they can be the most clever. And it's almost like a fencing match, who can touch the other with their sword. And that's ridiculous, because that's not what we need for most senior leaders. I would like to start, the first question to each candidate would be, describe your character and give us absolute examples of your character in action. You have 10 minutes, and your opponent can say nothing during that 10 minutes. I know we've had a few people get up there who couldn't talk for 10 minutes about their character if they had to. And I think that would put pressure on everybody to say, now, wait a minute, what is my character? Can I actually defend what I believe my character to, or what I want you to believe my character to be? And could be a forcing function to pull people up, and to pull us who select our leaders, are responsible for who leads us because we vote or don't vote for them, to focusing on the things that I think are most important.
Yes, and let's not have them prepare for that question. That question should come. There's nobody who's going to write their answers for them. But your point of them having examples and having to prove that makes perfect sense to me. And I think that when it comes to those in power, I don't know that the word character always is at the top of the list. It's popularity, right?
Right.
And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
To your point, we're in a funny position where in recent years, we've been willing to accept really terrible character in people that are celebrities or leaders of any kind in our society. And we've reached this strange thing where we say, well, they're so good at what they do, it's okay if they are a despicable individual in the rest of their lives. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that.
No, not at all. It should be an exercise in school. I think that it should be taught in school. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I used to do a thing when I was teaching leadership at Yale. I would make the students write their obituary. And that was a little shocking to a Yale student, that they're projecting in the future. And I said, well, they're not just going to, in your obituary, they're not just going to list the jobs you had. They're going to talk about you, what your character was. What do you want them to write? If it's accurate, if it's honest, what would you want to have written?
Why did you write the book?
Well, I started the book simply because I had these opinions on a number of disparate subjects. And Annie, I was talking to her about them, and she goes, I think some of these are pretty interesting, write them down. And again, I think that was to shut me up, but I started writing this series of essays. And after I'd written a number of them, we realized that they all intersected on the question of character, because that's what I've been thinking about the last few years. Like most of us, I'd been exposed to training and education on character throughout my life, but I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about it. And then as you get older and you start to realize there's more behind you than in front of you, you're not just trying to argue that you had good character. You're trying to ask yourself, do I have good character? Was it what I needed in the past? Do I have it now? How could it be better? And I found that valuable. So the book is not a prescription for anyone, doesn't give anyone the right answer for character. What it does is it describes my exploration of what I think, and it offers some subjects that might be helpful for other people if they force themselves to think about those questions. Their answers, I think, will help them decide what their character is.
You wrote something in there and it talked about connection. Of course, that sparked my brain because that's my entire platform, as I said. And you talked about the O Club. And you mentioned about how there were things that happened at the O Club that could be very good at connecting and things that happen at the O Club that might not be. And I love that you brought that in the book because I don't know that most people know what an O Club is. And I do now, but I also totally understand what it means that people don't take the mask off to connect with their teams and really showcase who they really are when they don't have their title. Can you tell us a little bit about the O Club and what you should
Sure.
about?
O Club refers to an officers club, and on every installation, traditionally, there are enlisted clubs for the most junior soldiers, non-commissioned officers clubs, and then officers clubs. And that's so that you go and you socialize, let your hair down with people of generally your same rank. And that's a healthy stratification because you don't want to completely relax around the most junior people, et cetera. The O Club was interesting because I joined the Army in the 70s, and it was sort of a bifurcated thing. On the one hand, it had some traditional aspects. It had a formal dining room, some of them did, and a golf course and that sort of thing. But it also had bars, and the bars, I mean, even had dancers in them when I first came in the military at lunch. Uh, and, and of course at night. And then at night on some of the clubs, they got pretty raucous. And sometimes they got stupidly raucous. And I used to describe it as jackassery. And it was, in one sense, it was a group of people who had hard jobs and did difficult things and were letting their hair down together, and you built relationships and had funny stories that came out of those that were really positive because it was a different venue than out on the battlefield or training field or anything like that. And so it was a different interaction, and it was very positive. There was always the danger that somebody was going to cross the line and do something that they regret the next day. But mostly that didn't happen. In the early 1980s, when the Mothers Against Drunk Driving really got traction, the O Club started to die because first there was this big push, and a lot of officers had to drive to the club and back, and there was no Uber then or anything. And so it was harder logistically to do that. And it just wasn't responsible to go get drunk and drive like it never had been, but it had been a practice. And so it started to die, and plus people started going off post. And what was lost is there was a connection. And you'd appreciate this, Jody. There was interaction that you just never had in any other kind of environment that did help form sinew. You know, I sometimes joke with people, once you've had a beer with someone, your relationship with them is a bit different. And fortunately, I think most of the times it's a bit stronger because there's another aspect, another connection, an informal connection that goes with all the formal connections. And so I think that the erosion of there's still a few of them around, but the officers' clubs aren't what they were. I think the military lost something with that. And I'm not arguing they have to bring them back, but I'm saying we need to understand what we lost.
No, and I appreciate that because I think it's when we disarm that part of ourselves and we bring ourselves, could be a beer, it could be going and doing something else together. You know, sometimes I'll do walking meetings with people because I live by the water. So we'll walk on the boardwalk and it's a formal meeting, but we both love the water, we found out. So now we're walking on the boardwalk and it just brings it to this whole other space. I think connection and character in my mind go together because when we're better connected to who we truly are, we really can understand our character even better in my mind, in my point of view. I don't know if you feel the same way on that.
I feel exactly the same way. And we can appreciate someone else's character because usually at work, we have a certain aspect of us that we show. And when we're in other environments, whether it's on the boardwalk or at dinner or some other thing, you show a little bit of a different side of yourself. And most of us are actually like diamonds. You know, depending upon the angle you look at, you get a completely refreshingly different view of that person.
Absolutely. Another thing I'll bring up real quick about the book is you talked about incentive programs. And you talked about the fact that, if your environment is one in which you're connective, right? And one in which you feel good about, the incentive programs sometimes don't have to be as big as we all think they have to be. And I know I've done the best when I know that the people who I'm surrounded by, that may work for or work with, care about me, care about my outcome. And so I love that you put that in there, because money can't buy everything, right?
Yeah, and I think money sometimes just complicates things. The beauty in the military is Congress set the pay rates. No commander could give bonuses or raises. So there was no discussion of money ever. Everyone knew how much everybody made. You made the decision to be in the military, and so you accepted how much you were going to get paid. And the purity of that really makes it easier. Now that I've been in the civilian world for 15 years, I find that the civilian world, they think that incentives of money are what drive people. And I think, like you, I think it's only part of it. Most people are satisfied with their bonus until they find out that somebody else got more, and then they're suddenly dissatisfied, which means that the bonus value wasn't what was important, except in terms of as a feedback mechanism. I think we've created this almost a Gordian knot of complexity to incentives. I mean, I've been on a bunch of boards of directors now, and you have these incredibly complicated packages, they call them, for a CEO that gets hired. And it's all these things. In my opinion, if you need all that to get the CEO to work hard, you're picking the wrong person. And I think that we could do an awful lot of simplification of that and understanding what people really need financially, and then what they need intangibly in intrinsic.
I think, because nonprofits, my background, and they can't, nonprofits just, they cannot pay what a typical for-profit could. So giving them time to enjoy life, and an environment that feels healthy, I think is just, it should be everywhere. It should be easy. That part should be very, very easy. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome in your career?
I think constantly, from the day I went to West Point, and then throughout my career, every time you go into a new intimidating environment. When I went into special operating forces, suddenly you got these very experienced people, and I was a young officer, so I was in command of a number of very experienced warfighters, and yet I'm in charge. They're calling me sir, and it feels ridiculous. But everybody sort of gets the joke. They know how the system has to work to make it. So you've got to understand that the imposter syndrome, it can undercut your confidence, but it also can be really good as a tension mechanism. It brings you back down to humility. It reminds you that you actually are an imposter. And then when I got more senior, experiences where you become a senior general, and suddenly I'm in the Oval Office in a strategy discussion with the president and the key people. And you say, wow, they don't understand it's just me in here. If they figure out it's just Stan McChrystal, that somebody's going to come in and throw me out. And then I look around the room and I remind myself, these are just knuckleheads just like me. We're all imposters in this room. And that's the reality of it. We kind of all are. And so that stops you from being too intimidated by anyone else. Even, people who have great, clowns and jugglers and people walking behind them and saying how wise they are, they're just people. And so if you can admit your own imposter reality, but also understand theirs, respect them, but don't fear their greatness, you do a lot better.
Absolutely. And I'll admit, I had imposter syndrome today. I was thinking to myself, wow, I am interviewing a four-star general and then you have that moment where you're like, he's human, I'm human. We're just going to have a really great conversation. And I share that openly because I feel like it's so important for people to know it's normal. And maybe if we talk more about it, it'll slowly disappear.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. And some people manifest their insecurity by trying to act overconfident when they're not. You can usually see through it pretty quickly, but it's almost pathetic to watch somebody more puffed up and they're trying to play a role that they think that they should play. And often they don't do it as effectively as they hope they do.
Right. And that's those people, and when you do see it, I feel sorry, for that. Like you almost want to like hug them or something. And it's just, and you're like in that moment, it's just breathe. Please just breathe. Everything is going to be okay. So I totally agree with you. You do speak about your incredible wife, 48 years.
48.
So what's the secret? Because so many people want to know that.
Yeah. I'd like to say marry well, but you don't know what you're doing when you decide to ask someone to marry you. I mean, I thought she was good looking, had great legs, and so asked her to marry me. But we've been together dating for almost 3 years, and I knew that there was a comfort with her, but it's hard to project forward what someone's going to be because we all change over time. So I like to tell people that the myth is you meet, fall in love, get married, and live happily ever after. And I don't think that's true. You meet, you fall in love, you get married, and you work at it every day because marriage goes up and down in my experience. And there are times when I'm more in love with her than she is with me. And there are times when things pull us apart and we kind of wax and wane with the sea. And you have to understand that's the reality. At a certain point in your career or life, I think you can start to understand that I love this person so much that even though we're going to have difficult fights, big disagreements, we're going to have periods where we're just not happy. It is so important, it is so valuable that I am going to stick in for the long term. And you start to say, I'm going to be married to you to the day I die. Now you say that at your married vows, but I don't think you know what it means. I think as you go further, you suddenly say, one of us is going to die first and the other's going to be there. And that's it. That gives, I find that very comforting because I don't have to worry about whether this thing's going to work. I know that's long since been decided. And instead I can use it as one of the constants in my life, even though I still got to work at it every day.
I'm sure we all are. We're all working at it every day, and it's such a beautiful story. I want to ask you quickly about your granddaughters, who you speak so. Oh my goodness, they sound like totally the apple of your eye, and you live on the same block with them. You said 20 feet away, but how old are they? First, we'll ask you that. How old are they?
Emmy, Lou, Elsie, and Daisy, and they are 11, just turned 11, 8, and 5.
Oh,
and they are all little blonde-haired girls. They're completely different. If you tell each of them to go put your clothes on, they'll come out in 3 strikingly different kinds of outfits, and they will act differently. But then they'll be like the 3 amigos, and they will be getting into trouble together and playing like they're going to be close forever. And then the next minute, one of them's beating on another one. I came in one day and the oldest was beating on the youngest. And I said, Emmy, what are you doing? She goes, she's just got to learn. I said, well, fair point.
Well, I'm about to be a grandma for the first time. And so I hear it's a whole unique experience, different than having your own children. It's a different kind of love, they say. Do you feel that way?
Oh, yeah, it's much easier too, because you're not responsible. I spoil them, I do whatever I want, and then their parents have got to deal with that. And that's their problem.
What have they taught you, Stan?
They've given me a longer view of me because the way I think about it is, they see me through a different lens, and that's very important to me. I don't really care that much about what most other people think of me. I really do care what my granddaughters think of me. Now, in the near term, they like granddaddy. I mean, there's no doubt about that, but I want them to respect who I was, how I am. I've given a copy of each of my books to them inscribed, and they haven't read them yet, but someday I think they might, and they will hear and read about me. And I want them to have a complete picture, and I want that picture to be, we're proud that we're his granddaughters. And so it's a forcing function not to do something that would ever embarrass them.
Oh my goodness, that touched me. That's beautiful. Really, really beautiful. So before we end, two more questions for you. What do you want to share with leaders right now that might be listening when it comes to character in for themselves,
Yeah.
and how do they work with their teams to pull out goodness from them so that they work cohesively?
Yeah. I think leaders have got to remember they work for the organization, and so they have got to be servant leaders to the people that are in that organization. At the same time, there's a balance. They've also got to reflect their own values and character as well. And so sometimes we think that because I'm in a certain job, I've got a fiduciary responsibility or some other responsibility to be a certain way and make decisions. They're not the decisions that I would make in my character, but in that role, I have to do it. I think you've got to step away from that. And I would urge people never to make decisions that they think are not congruent with their character. And if they find themselves in a position where they can't fix those, they probably got to leave the job, because you will not be happy with having done something that you said, well, I had to because I was X. I mean, there are tough decisions you make you'd like not to make, but not ones that don't reflect your character. And the second is, as you're building your team, you've got to be what you want them to be, meaning you've got to exemplify the character you want to see in them all the time, because they're watching 24/7, either directly or indirectly. And so, particularly if you try to state one level of values, you put this big value statement up in your company, you say, this is how we're going to be, but then they see you or other leadership making decisions that don't really reflect that. You know, we say client first, and then you see making decisions that aren't that. You've either got to fix that reality, or you got to take the sign down, because you've got to be honest with your team in who you are and what the values that you are propagating are all the time.
So I want you to give everyone a homework assignment today. And this was not pre-planned. We have about, I think, 102 countries who have downloaded this podcast so far. What is their homework assignment that you can give them on character?
Yeah, I'm going to step it away from the individual, because although that's important, I'd ask everyone to write what you want the national character of your nation to be. And it's interesting on that. Do you want it to be honest? Do you want it to be loyal to allies? Do you want it to be generous? Do you want it to be, or is it more important to win? And these aren't simple. They're simple to answer initially, but when you really sit down and say, what do I want the national character to be? And try to describe it as someone from yet another country would describe you. Write it, you know, if I'm an American, write it so someone from another country would describe America's national character. How would I like that to be written? What would I hope that they would write if they're being honest?
Could you give us what the start of that sentence would be, just so somebody can take that down real fast and get it? I love giving them a little bit of a prompt.
I'd say the character of America is, and fill in their country is, and then people would describe that. Almost like if a child asked you, well, what's the character of France? You'd say, okay, the character of France is, and then fill that in.
I love that. I appreciate you doing that. And I really hope that I wanted to give an assignment out only because we talked about connection, we're talking about character, and we're talking about people have to go introspective at this point in time in the world we're in right now, so that they can share their character and connect with people organically, authentically, in the right way. Where can people find your incredible book?
Well, you're kind of say they can find it on Amazon, or you can go to McChrystalgroup.com. We can also provide it to you. And I would just ask everyone to consider the issue of character for young people as well. Think of people who are still in school or just graduated. Give them something. I would have loved to read a book like this back when I was younger. Someone would have had to remind me to do that, but I would have. And I think that it would have been of value to me.
Same, absolutely. And I will be giving it to my children. So, and they're 20s and in their 20s, but it's so valuable. I want to thank you, Stan. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we go?
Just my gratitude for being with you today, Jody.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to meet you and have the opportunity to share your story. And everybody, please purchase his book on character. It's wonderful. I'm going to say what I say at the end of every single podcast. Today is the day. You cannot go back to yesterday, and you do not yet own tomorrow. So what small or large step are you going to take today to get yourself closer to your goals? Thank you again to General Stanley McChrystal for being part of this wonderful podcast. And I appreciate you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Jody.